So I just saw The Brutalist this past weekend, finally, all 3.5 hours of it with that 15-minute intermission. I mean, I went in at 2:30 and came out at 7. It was dark outside when I got into this movie. And I'm a little late with this film due to the limited release in December, and now I'm kind of sick, so I didn't get to see it when I wanted to. But I finally saw it, and I'm emotionally and physically exhausted. But was it worth it? The Brutalist is the epic period A24 drama that stars Adrien Brody, Guy Pearce, and Felicity Jones. The film is directed by Brady Corbet and written by Corbet and his wife, Mona Fastvold. Brody plays Laszlo Toth, a Jewish immigrant from Hungary who comes to America to make a new start. Being separated from his wife and his niece, they write letters back and forth to each other, and Laszlo moves to Pennsylvania, where he meets a wealthy, prominent industrialist, Harrison Lee Van Buren, played by the amazing Guy Pearce. When Van Buren finds out that Toth was a well-known brutalist architect back in Hungary, he hires him to create a community facility that is a mixed-use building that would include a library, a theater, a gym, and a chapel. The complex project is plagued with problems, but the main problem being Van Buren's control issues and his narcissism being disguised as philanthropy. This movie sounds pretty dull, right? It seems that way because it's actually kind of hard to do a movie review about this movie without spoiling it for you. This is a complex film, one that kind of has to be broken down and dissected if you have the time. There's so much that I could say about this film, but I'm gonna just tell you why I think this film is an absolute masterpiece and a ringer for Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Director, and maybe Best Supporting Actor at the Oscars this year. First, the cinematography is absolutely insane. It's shot by cinematographer Lil Crowley. It's mostly shot in VistaVision, and you may be asking, what is VistaVision?
The VistaVision camera was the result. Using this, the new VistaVision film negative, twice as big, twice as clear as the old-style negative, bringing brilliance and glowing colors never achieved before.
I never saw the sunshine.
Okay, forget all that. It's probably not that important if you don't want to go down that technical aspect of the film. They advertised this a lot before the film came out, and it's very prominent on the movie poster and on the marketing material. And because of that, lots of critics thought this was just a marketing scheme or marketing ploy. But I kind of have a different take on that. As someone who uses wide-angle lenses myself, the wider you go, the more the lens sort of bends and distorts reality. Filming in VistaVision was a really brilliant choice because with that format, it's really, really wide, even with the 50mm lens. There isn't any distortion, and when it comes to a film about architecture, you really can't have that distortion. I saw this film in IMAX 70mm, and it was beautiful. It has that beautiful soft film look, and it was the little film specks that you'd see in the old 60 films that gave it this nice little nostalgia. It's one of the most beautiful photographed films that I've ever seen in theaters. I hope because of this film, more films will actually be shot in VistaVision format. It was a huge format for Hitchcock, and one of my favorite scenes is from one of my favorite shots from one of my favorite movies, Vertigo, at the San Francisco Bridge in that format. And you see the grand scale of the bridge compared to the person in the scene, and it's one of my favorite shots. One of my favorite shots in this film also looks like it was shot in the water. Like they had to shoot way steep in the water for this beautiful shot. I don't know if that's what they did, and I know that's not something new, but the composition looks beautiful and it's absolutely stunning. There are some beautiful scenes shot in a quarry in Italy that were so epic and beautiful. It's a scene that will probably be studied by cinematographers for years and years. There's a grand scale, again, of the marble compared to the people in the frame, and it is now probably one of my all-time favorites. The score by Daniel Blumberg, the British indie rocker, is very, very powerful. It's full of hope at times, and it feels giant in scale with the picture that you're seeing. It's so epic, and the music during a ribbon-cutting scene is full of complexity. There are beautiful piano arrangements and the massive horns right after that. It brings so much emotion and depth to the scenes. It's incredible. In the beginning of the film, you see Laszlo pushing his way through a crowd of people. There's this voiceover as all this is going on, and it's his wife reading a letter to him. There are subtitles on the screen, so it was kind of difficult to figure out what was going on in the chaos. And then light breaks through, and you see that upside-down shot of the Statue of Liberty, and you realize that he's on a boat with other immigrants. When you see the Statue of Liberty, the score becomes this cinematic opera, if that's a thing, that's aggressive and strong and sort of heroic. It was a stunning start to the film and one of the most memorable scenes for me. And that Statue of Liberty, I know it's been kind of marketed a lot in this movie. It's even on the poster. And a lot of critics are saying that it's sort of another marketing ploy, but I thought it was beautiful. The film seems like a novel. The first 100 minutes is part 1, and it's called The Enigma of Arrival. This seems to be a reference to the novel of the same name, but I'm not quite sure. It could be a strange coincidence. Part 1 starts off in 1947, and I think it ends in 1953. And Part 2 is another 100 minutes and is called The Hardcore of Beauty and covers the years from 1953 to 1960. Then finally, there's an epilogue that wraps everything up in the 1980s. Even the intermission looked like a scene that could have come directly from The Godfather. Laszlo and his wife's wedding photo with the 15-minute countdown, and I can tell you, I really appreciated that intermission. Part 1 and Part 2 were surprisingly very different from each other. It works very well, though, and when you get to Part 2, hold on, it's gonna be pretty bumpy. Part 1 is more of an optimistic look at an immigrant coming to America with hopes and dreams, and Part 2, it's kind of pessimistic with those hopes and dreams kind of being trampled on. Adrien Brody's performance was phenomenal. The accent that he had to pull off during the film was, to me, perfection. And I know there's some controversy because there has been some AI used, but it was mainly for syllables and letters that he couldn't get quite right. And I think it's okay because they wanted it to be as authentic as they could make it. And I think that's a good thing. His facial expressions and the emotion that he had to bring to this character was award-winning acting in itself. I can't see him not winning the Oscar for Best Actor. Guy Pearce was born to play Van Buren. Even though his name seemed pretty obvious and lazy, it's like they picked a name that was just kind of a cliche of some power-hungry industrialist. It's as simple as Scrooge McDuck or Max Power.
Max Power, he's the man whose name you'd love to touch, but you mustn't touch.
But his performance was unforgettable. He makes you feel unsure and makes you really wonder if his motives are pure or not. There's a scene where he purposely humiliates Laszlo at dinner. It's humiliating. And you wonder if Van Buren sees Laszlo as a pet or someone he's helping for show. The character development of all these characters are very well established in this film. I mean, I guess they have to be for a 4-hour movie. Again, I can't go too much into the story here without giving too much away, but it was a very interesting way they chose to tell this immigrant story. It's been told by the director in interviews that it's a lot about being a creative and trying to make something beautiful, but how hard that can be when there are really bad people who take control and end up trying to destroy what you're trying to create. He had this experience on a film and put a lot of that experience into this film. This film has a lot of Paul Thomas Anderson vibes to it. It feels like a combination of There Will Be Blood and The Master. It also made me think of the 1970 Bernardo Bertolucci film, The Conformist. You can bet that Corbet was probably a fan of these two directors because you see that type of filmmaking all over this film. Again, I can't go into much without spoiling the film, but I can tell you that I'm convinced that this is the best film of 2024. I wish I had seen it before I made my top 10 list of the best films of 24 because it would be number 1 on the list for sure. It's a huge, epic 5-star out of 5 film, and a movie that will probably be required screening in film school for sure. It's rated R for strong language, nudity, and strong sexually explicit content. There are a few really intense scenes, but it is, in my opinion, a masterpiece. This is a film that you break down analyze, study the filmmaking, debate the theme and the message. It really is an incredible movie. I didn't even go into the set design or the lighting of this movie. I think this is a movie that you can sit with your friends over coffee and talk about for hours and dissect it. I think it would be a great movie for someone who really loved the movie to talk about with somebody who hated the movie. There's a lot to talk about here. There may be a lot of people who are not into this film, especially if they're not into films like There Will Be Blood or The Conformist or The Godfather.
What?
Did not care for The Godfather.
How can you even say that, Dad?
Didn't like it.
It may not be for the type of people who aren't into art house film or films that are almost 4 hours long. It's not for everyone.
Explain yourself. What didn't you like about it?
It insists upon itself, Lois.
This was a pretty hard review to write because there is so much to talk about in this film, and I didn't know where to start. I think a lot of people will think this movie, especially critics, is kind of pretentious. I think they'll think that it steals some material from other movies, but I think it's really an homage to other movies. I think some of the creative things that the director did in this movie, like what he did with the credits, was cool. I don't know if it had much of a meaning, but it does seem sort of pretentious to me. But I'm okay with that because it's a beautiful film. This was a pretty hard review to write because there is so much to talk about in this film. This review really needs to be a spoiler type review, but it would probably be a few hours long. I really need someone to do that kind of review with me on a live stream. So if you're a YouTube movie reviewer out there, let me know. If you're a real cinephile, you'll love this film. So go see it in IMAX 70mm if you can. It's worth it. And remember, don't wait till it streams. Let's go to the theater and let's see it together.
I promise. Beautiful.